Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at something that I think a lot of you out there can relate to.
Mm.
You know, that kind of frustrating gap between being able to understand English and actually speaking it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like we can binge shows or understand the lyrics to our favorite songs, maybe even get the gist of what we're talking about here. But when it comes to actually speaking, it's like,
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, it's that moment where like your tongue turns to lead and you just freeze up.
yeah, absolutely.
And it's actually a very common phenomenon. It really comes down to how our brains actually process language. There's this really interesting distinction between like passive understanding, so that's when you're reading or listening,
Right.
and active production, which is what happens when you actually speak.
So it's like we've been going to the gym, doing all this training for listening comprehension,
Mm-hmm.
but then the speaking muscles are just like,
Yeah, totally. It's a great analogy. I mean, if you only ever went to the gym to watch other people work out, you wouldn't really expect to see much change in your own physique, right? Would you?
no.
Speaking a language is really similar. It requires that active engagement and that consistent practice.
Okay,
Sure.
so we need to exercise these speaking muscles.
Mhm.
But what are some of the things that trip us up and make us freeze when we want to, actually try and speak? I know I've had those moments where it's like my brain just completely short circuits.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the main things is just simply lack of dedicated speaking practice. So you might be taking in tons of English content, but if you're not actually producing a language yourself, those neural pathways, that's for speaking, they aren't actually being strengthened.
Oh, so it's like learning all the steps to a dance, but you never actually get on the dance floor.
Exactly, you got it.
Yeah.
And even when we do try to speak, there's this other mental hurdle, this fear of making mistakes.
Oh, tell me about it. I remember when I first started speaking English, I was so self-conscious. And it's amazing how even when you have, like a decent vocabulary, that fear can just totally derail you.
Yeah, it's a totally normal reaction. Actually, studies have shown that our brains react to social blunders, like making a mistake when you're speaking, in a similar way to physical pain. So it's almost like that fear of messing up is hardwired into us.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how do we get over that and start speaking with more confidence?
Well, the first step is just to acknowledge that making mistakes is just part of the process. It's actually crucial. Think about how children learn language. They don't wait until they have perfect grammar. They just experiment and they make mistakes and they learn from it.
So true. It's all about, embracing the imperfections, focusing on progress, not perfection.
Absolutely. And another thing that can hinder our speaking fluency is that tendency to think in our native language and then translating word for word.
Oh, the translation trap.
Yes.
I've definitely fallen into that one before.
Yeah.
But what makes it so detrimental?
Well, it creates this huge cognitive load. Like, imagine trying to have a conversation while simultaneously juggling like 5 mental tasks.
Yeah.
You're translating individual words, you're figuring out the grammar, and you're trying to sound natural.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that we just feel completely overwhelmed.
It's like, cooking a 5-course meal while simultaneously doing your taxes and training for a marathon.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like, no wonder it ends up a mess.
Exactly. So to speak more fluently, we need to break free from that and start thinking more directly in English.
Okay, so we've identified some hurdles:
Mm-hmm.
lack of practice, fear of mistakes, the translation trap. But let's talk solutions. What can we actually do to start speaking more confidently?
Well, the most important piece of advice I can give is really simple, and a lot of people overlook it. Just start speaking. Don't wait until you feel ready or perfect. Jump in and start practicing as much as possible.
It's easier said than done. But how do we make that happen, especially when all these fears and insecurities are holding us back?
That's where this technique called shadowing comes in. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I have. It's like mimicking a native speaker, I think. But I've always wondered, how does that help us speak better?
Well, it's more than just mimicking. It's about internalizing the rhythm, the intonation, that natural flow of the language.
Okay.
It's like if you want to learn to dance, you would follow the footsteps of an expert dancer. You're training your mouth and your brain to produce those sounds authentically.
So we find a short audio clip and we just try to repeat it, matching every inflection.
Exactly. And you can use anything, a movie scene, a podcast episode, even a YouTube video. Just choose something that you enjoy that has clear, natural sounding speech.
Okay, that sounds pretty manageable. Even a few minutes a day can make a difference, right?
Absolutely. Consistency is key. And the great thing about shadowing is you can do it anytime, anywhere.
Okay, shadowing is going on my to-do list. But what about those of us who might not have someone to practice with regularly? Any tips for solo practice?
You absolutely can practice speaking alone. It might feel a little silly at first, but talking to yourself is actually a fantastic way to get those words flowing without that pressure of an audience.
Wait, so you're suggesting I start having full-blown conversations with myself? Because I houseplants might start to get a little worried.
Uh-huh. No need for full-blown conversations unless your plants are particularly chatty.
Right.
But try narrating your day, describing what you're doing, or even just naming objects around you. The goal is to just get comfortable forming those sentences out loud.
I actually see how that would be helpful. It's like giving your brain a low-pressure workout in the privacy of your own home. No judgment, just you and the language.
Exactly. And you might be surprised at how much it helps. I actually knew someone who used to practice English by talking to their plants every day, and they swore by it.
That's amazing. So I guess plants make pretty good listeners then.
Well, the point is to find what works for you, and don't be afraid to experiment. Even those small, consistent efforts, they can add up to significant progress.
I love that.
Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're ready for some more tips on how to kind of break free from that understand but can't speak rut.
Oh, I'm ready and raring to go. Before the break, we were talking about, solo practice, things like talking to your plants.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, for those of us who are ready to kind of, venture beyond the houseplant conversations and actually start interacting with the real people, any advice for kind of navigating those first, real world speaking situations?
That's a great question. One thing I would say that can really help is to shift your focus from perfection to connection. Remember, the goal of speaking a language is to communicate, to share ideas, to build relationships.
Right. It's not about sounding like a textbook. It's about using the language as a tool to actually connect.
Exactly. And I think that shift in mindset can be incredibly liberating. Instead of getting all bogged down in the grammar rules and worrying about every little mistake, you can just focus on the message you're trying to get across and the connection that you're building with the person.
Yeah, that's such a powerful reminder. But I know a lot of learners struggle with feeling self-conscious or judged, when they speak.
Yeah.
How can we overcome those feelings and start to feel more comfortable in those real-life situations?
Well, first, just remember that most people are far more understanding and encouraging than we give them credit for. They're not judging your every word or grammatical error.
Right.
They're much more interested in what you're trying to say.
So it's okay to stumble, hesitate, ask for clarification. It's all part of the process.
Exactly. And if you are feeling nervous, try starting with low-pressure speaking opportunities. Practice with other learners or friends or family who are going to be supportive and understanding.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of like easing into the deep end of the pool instead of jumping straight in.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we find those opportunities, especially if we don't have a lot of English-speaking friends or family?
Well, there are tons of resources out there. There's language exchange apps, online communities, local meetups. There's really something for everyone. And the beauty of these communities is that everyone is in the same boat. Everyone's learning, everyone's making mistakes. So there's this kind of built-in sense of support and understanding.
Oh, it's like having a built-in cheering squad.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of self-talk. So before a speaking situation, just remind yourself that it's okay to make mistakes, that you're doing your best and that every experience is an opportunity to learn and grow.
It's so important to cultivate that supportive inner voice.
Absolutely. And remember, progress isn't always linear. There will be days when you feel like you're nailing it and days when you feel like you're back to square one.
Yeah.
But it's all part of the process.
So true. The key is to be patient with ourselves and celebrate those small wins along the way.
Exactly. And remember, the goal is communication. It's about connecting with others, sharing ideas, and experiencing the world in a new way.
So beautifully said. Now, speaking of connecting with others, we've talked a lot about, finding speaking partners, mentors.
Right.
But what about the role of listening in all of this?
Listening. Yeah, it's often overlooked, but active listening is absolutely crucial for improving our speaking skills.
Oh, okay. Break that down for us. What does active listening actually entail? And how does it help us become better speakers?
So it's about more than just passively hearing words. It's about consciously absorbing how native speakers use the language. So their pronunciation, their intonation, the way they structure their sentences, even their body language.
So we're kind of like becoming linguistic detectives,
Yes.
observing how the language is used in its natural habitat.
Exactly. And the more that we expose ourselves to that authentic English being spoken by native speakers, the more we internalize those subtle patterns and rhythms that make the language sound so natural and effortless.
It's like training our ears to recognize the music of the language.
Beautifully said. And the good news is we are surrounded by opportunities to practice active listening. Podcasts, TV shows, movies, documentaries, music. It's all out there.
So turning that passive consumption into active learning. So instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media, we can actually be engaging with content that's exposing us to real-world English.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to slow down, rewind sections that you find challenging or particularly interesting. Listen multiple times, focus on the pronunciation, try to imitate the speaker's intonation and rhythm.
It's like having a personal language coach in your pocket.
Precisely. And another powerful technique is to try transcribing short sections of what you're listening to.
Transcribing, like actually writing down what we hear.
Exactly. It may sound a bit tedious, but it forces you to pay attention to every single word and nuance. And it's a great way to train your ear for different accents and speaking style.
Oh, I never thought about it like that. It's like a deep dive into the mechanics of the language.
Exactly. And by engaging with the language on that deeper level, we're not only improving our listening comprehension, but we're also laying the foundation for more natural and fluent speaking.
Right, so the more we absorb those patterns and rhythms, the more naturally they'll flow out when we speak.
Precisely. Now let's talk about another technique that can really accelerate our progress, and that is the power of learning in chunks.
Chunk learning.
Yes.
We've touched on this a bit earlier, but I'm eager to dive a little deeper. What does it actually mean to learn in chunks? And how does it help us speak more fluently?
So remember how we talked about the importance of learning phrases rather than just individual words?
Yes, it's like having those pre-built blocks of language ready to go.
Exactly. And that's essentially what chunk learning is all about. It's about identifying and internalizing these common phrases, these expressions that native speakers use naturally in conversation.
So instead of piecing together sentences word by word, we're learning these ready-made chunks that flow together.
Precisely. And not only does this approach make speaking feel more natural and fluid, it also reduces that cognitive load, so you can focus on the message you're trying to get across rather than getting stuck on grammar rules.
It's like having a secret weapon.
Yeah.
But how do we find those magic chunks, and how do we actually incorporate them effectively into our practice?
Well, it's a combination of observation and deliberate study. So start by paying attention to how native speakers speak. Listen for those recurring phrases and expressions that come up again and again in conversations. You can also find lists of common chunks online or in language learning textbooks.
So it's kind of like we're detectives, searching for clues.
Exactly. And once you've identified some useful chunks, practice using them in different contexts, role play scenarios, create your own dialogues, just incorporate them into your everyday conversations as much as possible.
So the more we use them, the more natural and automatic they become, like building muscle memory for language.
Exactly. And as you become more comfortable using those chunks, you'll find that you're able to speak more fluently and confidently, even in those situations that used to make you nervous.
It's such a powerful reminder that fluency isn't about knowing every single word in the dictionary. It's about mastering those essential building blocks.
Couldn't agree more. And the beauty of chunk learning is it's a technique you can use throughout your entire language learning journey. From beginner to advanced level, there's always more to learn.
Oh, I love that. It's not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process of expanding that linguistic toolbox.
Exactly. And remember, the goal is to use these chunks in real-life conversations. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there, even if you're not feeling 100% confident. The more you practice, the more natural and automatic it will become.
This has been so insightful. We've covered so much, from the neuroscience of language learning to these really practical techniques to overcoming that fear and building fluency. I'm feeling really motivated to keep pushing forward on my own English-speaking journey. Welcome back. I'm feeling so energized after all those practical tips on chunk learning and active listening.
Yeah,
It's amazing how many tools we have to really boost our speaking confidence.
it's true. And building on those tools, I think it's important to remember that language learning isn't just an individual pursuit.
Right.
It's also about the environment that we create for ourselves.
Okay.
Think of it like tending a garden. You need the right conditions for those language skills to really blossom.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what are some key ingredients for cultivating a thriving language learning environment?
Well, one of the most important is consistent exposure. We need to surround ourselves with English as much as possible. Make it a part of our daily lives, even outside of, dedicated study time.
So it's not just about, those hour-long grammar drills. It's about finding ways to integrate English into our everyday routines.
Exactly. Think about things that you enjoy doing: music, movies, TV shows, books, podcasts, even video games,
Right.
and find ways to experience those in English.
That's such a good point. It's about making those small, consistent changes,
Yes.
like switching your phone's language settings to English
Mm.
or listening to English music while you commute.
Exactly. Those little things can make a surprisingly big difference.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the power of reading. Find books, articles, blogs, anything that grabs your interest, and just make it a habit to read in English regularly.
Well, I'm a huge advocate for reading. It's
Mm.
not just about expanding our vocabulary. It's about immersing ourselves in, different writing styles, different perspectives.
Absolutely. And don't just passively read. Actively engage with the text.
Right.
Highlight new words, look up definitions, try to really understand the nuances of the language,
Hmm.
and don't be afraid to read aloud. It might feel a little awkward at first, but it's a fantastic way to improve your pronunciation and fluency.
All right, reading aloud is going on my list.
Mm.
But what about actually speaking with other people? How do we overcome that initial hesitation and find those opportunities for real-life practice?
Well, one of the best things you can do is to find a language partner or a group of fellow learners to practice with regularly.
Right, because there's something very motivating about having that shared goal. It's like having a workout buddy.
Exactly. And the beauty of language exchange is that everyone benefits. You know, you get to practice your English and your partner gets to practice their native language. It's a win-win.
I love that. Where can we find these language partners?
Well, there are tons of options. Language exchange apps, online communities, local meetups. There's something for everyone. And even if you don't have a regular language partner, don't underestimate the power of just striking up conversations with English speakers in your daily life.
So it's about being proactive,
Mm-hmm.
seeking out those opportunities to
Exactly.
use the language.
Yeah, order your coffee in English, ask for directions in English, to chat with the cashier at the grocery store in English. Every interaction, no matter how small, it all helps to build your confidence and fluency.
I love that. It's a reminder that, language learning is not just about textbooks and classrooms. It's about engaging with the world around us.
And as you start to put yourself out there and practice speaking more regularly, remember to celebrate those small wins.
Right.
Every time you have a successful conversation, every time you understand something you didn't before, every time you feel a little bit more confident, acknowledge those achievements.
Yeah.
Give yourself credit for the progress that you're making.
That's so important.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in, what we still need to learn that we forget to appreciate how far we've come.
And remember, language learning is a journey. It's not a destination. There will be ups and downs. There will be moments of frustration. There will be moments of triumph. But if you stay curious, if you stay persistent, and if you surround yourself with a supportive community, you'll be amazed by what you can achieve.
This has been such an inspiring conversation. I'm walking away with a renewed sense of motivation and so many strategies to conquer that fear and unlock my speaking potential.
And that's what we hope for, to empower you with the knowledge and the confidence to really embrace this incredible journey of language learning. Remember, you're not alone in this. There's a whole community of learners out there cheering you on every step of the way.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Keep practicing, keep exploring, and never stop believing in the power of language to connect us, enrich our lives, and open up a world of possibilities.